I want to say more about a topic that I covered earlier, which was defining chronic and acute anxiety. Now, there was a great question from a RevitalLab coach who said, well, when I'm with a client and they're struggling with an issue, how can I tell if they're in acute or if they're in chronic anxiety? The example that was used with that question was having a leader who wants to quit their position but then decides to stay. They were very emotional during that time of deciding, thinking that they couldn't do the job. So, was that acute anxiety? This is a great opportunity to clarify the difference between chronic and acute anxiety and how you can tell the difference between the two. Those terms, chronic and acute anxiety, are from Bowen theory. I was introduced to them through Edwin Friedman. The words chronic, acute, and anxiety have their own cultural meanings in our everyday language, so sometimes these terms can be confusing when thinking about specific situations. When you have a client who's highly emotional and on the brink of a precipitous decision like quitting, the culture might call that an acute moment. But that isn't necessarily what acute means in systems thinking. The difference from our larger cultural meaning is that in Bowen theory, chronic anxiety is when I avoid facing an issue. I find ways to turn away from it. And acute anxiety is when I am productively facing an issue, I turn toward it. So you can't necessarily gauge whether someone is in chronic or acute anxiety based on how emotionally striking it is, how emotionally upset or expressive they are. That could all be a part of how they avoid facing their issue. That may be how they express their chronic anxiety, particularly someone who says, I'm going to quit, but actually they never quit. Or thinking of quitting is a way to avoid the challenge of handling themselves in a different way so that they will succeed during a difficult situation. Chronic anxiety is about turning away from my challenge so that I can maintain a comfort zone with it, even though I might look like and I might tell you that I'm very uncomfortable in this situation. For example, every time someone gets challenged, they might say, I'm going to quit, or I'm going to divorce you, or I can't live in this city anymore. And though it sounds dramatic, it could be a way of hiding chronic anxiety. Dramatic expression can be a way to turn away from facing a challenge. In fact, people may say these dramatic statements to get people to back off from expecting any changes from them. Many times, chronic anxiety will look like culturally normative, low-level expressions like mildly irritated, worried, shut down. But chronic anxiety can also look dramatic. It's not about the emotional decibel level. It's about whether someone faces or turns away from the challenge. Acute anxiety is when I face my challenges. Now that can feel on the inside, whether it looks like it on the outside or not. On the inside, it takes your breath away. It's bracing. You feel your fears and turn toward them anyway. Acute anxiety, where you've made the choice to face your challenge, can sound like this internal dialogue. Finally, I'm going to quit running from this. I'm going to square my shoulders, turn around, and face this challenge. Am I up for it? Can I do this? I'm going to have to do something really different. Once I see that a leader has chosen to face their anxiety, I get really excited because though it's uncomfortable for them, they don't like being there, what it is indicating is that they are now mobilizing enough energy to actually face this challenge. It's like that moment when you've put a bunch of individual ingredients in a bowl, mix the ingredients up, and at a certain moment, those ingredients become something else. They become batter, which when heat is applied undergoes an incredible transformation. The flavors blend and change, the batter rises in the pan, and becomes a delicious dessert. It's creating its own thing that's different from the initial ingredients. Acute anxiety musters your resources, so instead of having them drain away your energy, you pull your resources together to meet your challenge. Yes, sometimes it looks dramatic on the outside, but don't be sidetracked into thinking a leader's anxiety is chronic or acute just by the way it looks on the outside. The key question is this something they are chronically avoiding, or is it something that they are now directly facing, which creates acute anxiety in them? When a leader says, I just want to quit, that could be chronic anxiety, turning away so much so that they might quit. But on the other hand, the fact that a leader can feel those fears and concerns and allow themselves to feel them, they give themselves the space to muster their resources and are now ready to face their challenges and pick up some of the things they were not willing to do before, which are signs that they are in the acute phase, the productive phase of facing their challenges. Here are a couple indicators to look out for. When you see a leader do a pendulum swing, for example, between "I'm going to quit" to "I'm going to stay," that doesn't automatically mean a leader is facing their challenges. Be aware that both the acts of saying "I'm going to quit" and "I'm going to stay" can be avoiding their challenges. They are playing different characters in a play, but not yet embracing who they are in this play. If you see your clients swing from one end of actions to the other, they may look like they are facing their challenge, but perhaps they are still making less than thoughtful choices. They haven't yet settled into their bones that there is even a deeper challenge to face than whether to quit or to stay. And that deeper challenge is this: are they up for stretching themselves beyond what they currently know how to do, or beyond how they currently know how to relate to another person, or beyond how they currently view themselves? Something else to look out for is that challenge and facing your challenge doesn't automatically mean that they're going to have to face a conflict. So confrontational and facing a challenge are not the same. In fact, sometimes facing a challenge for a leader could be that they have to be more collaborative, that maybe they've been too conflictual, and now really facing the challenge is that they have to learn how to cooperate with people more. So, though it may be easy to confuse the two, conflict and facing a challenge are not automatically the same. You can think of acute challenges as living all along the backbone and heart balance. Many people are avoidant about having to step into a conflict and having to bring more backbone to it, and they need to acutely face that. But it's just as valid when someone's acute challenge is that they need to bring more collaboration. For example, someone whose acute challenge is bringing more acknowledgement and appreciation to their collaborations, which would be expressing more heart, and not only pointing out the gaps. In fact, for them, bringing more conflict and more gaps would be chronic and a way to avoid the challenge of becoming more versatile in what they notice their team doing, in what they talk to their staffs about. Backbone and heart is about righting our imbalance between the two, and there are a variety of ways to avoid the challenge of strengthening our weaker drive, whether it's backbone or heart. So remember not to get distracted by the decibel level of what the leader is telling you, or even by the kind of feeling that they're expressing, mad, sad, glad, or scared. None of that automatically tells you whether this is chronic or acute anxiety. How you can tell the difference between the two kinds of anxiety is if they are avoiding the challenge, that's chronic. If they're facing it, that is acute. Our task is to help leaders make an informed choice when they are up against a daunting challenge.